And we are rolling. Hello, this is Ralph with another video for Hermetic Temple Arts. And I know I've been away for a while, had a lot going on this last year, but I am now focusing back on creating videos for this channel. And I thought with Halloween coming up, one topic that always fascinates me is that of the world of spirit. And my way of interpreting tarot cards comes from the world of spirit. I try to have more of I wouldn't really call it theistic, but more of a spirit-based approach to my relationship with the tarot cards and tarot interpretation. And I originally got into that because, I was just raised in a very religious and spiritual background, a very theistic background, in which, relating to God as I understood God and the world of spirit and the angels and saints and all that stuff, it just seemed like second nature to me. But as I got into doing tarot back in the 1970s in high school, kind of rediscovering tarot again in this life, I began to just get the feeling that there is a presence there with the tarot that I've just learned to relate to and talk with and just work with in my interpretation of tarot. And I was really interested to discover two sources that tend to agree with that spirit-based or spiritual interpretation of the tarot. And one, this is going to be kind of controversial because he's still, even in the 21st century, he has the ability to scare the hell out of people. But one is Aleister Crowly. And in his book, The Book of Thoth, Egyptian Tarot, he clearly states that when we're dealing with tarot cards, we are dealing with living beings. And his understanding of the tarot is that not just the archetypes are alive, but the tarot cards themselves are alive. At least that's the interpretation that I get from reading his book. And with Aleister Crowly, I know he scares the heck out of a lot of people because when he was alive, he identified himself as the wickedest man in the world, and he was raised in a very fundamentalist Christian family, and he rebelled big time against that. And he just adopted a persona that just people thought he was a Satanist, people thought he was scary as can be. But if you read his stuff and you read it with a open mind and not a superstitious mind, you can kind of see the genius that Aleister Crowly had. And as a human being, he may have scared the heck out of a lot of people, but as an occultist, as a tarot interpreter, a tarot teacher, he definitely was a genius in his interpretation. And that's the point of view that Aleister Crowly comes from. He doesn't really explain it that well, but now I will explain from my interpretation, from my life experience, how I understand this. But he does definitely state that when we're talking about the tarot, when we're talking about the tarot archetypes, we're not just talking about concepts in the imagination. We're talking about dealing with living beings. Now, another person that agrees with that interpretation, again, from my understanding of his writings, is somebody that lived about the same time as Aleister Crowly, but came from a completely different discipline. Where Crowly was an occultist, this other man, over here, Carl G. Jung, who wrote the Red Book, which I have displayed there, he was a psychoanalyst, father of modern day psychoanalysis, the Jungian school of psychoanalysis, and he was also a very deep student of religious mythology And I mean, he just got very deeply involved with mythology and the archetypes. I mean, he really did a lot of the groundbreaking research into the role that the archetypes play, and the archetype universe, and how we relate to the archetypes. And modern day psychoanalysts and psychologists, they tend to try to clean up Carl Jung, in my opinion. And they try to state that the archetypes are just imaginary concepts, constructs of the human imagination, and that's how they work. But in my reading of the Red Book, Carl Jung has some pretty bizarre and pretty weird conversations with the archetypes. And I think if you read his stuff with an open mind, you pretty much, in my interpretation anyway, you pretty much have to come to the conclusion that Carl Jung also considered the archetypes to be living beings. Now, I don't think Carl Jung ever really did much work specifically with the tarot, and I don't think he ever really called the tarot living beings, but he definitely dealt with the archetypes as living beings. And in the Red Book, you definitely get the feeling that he's having some pretty deep and bizarre conversations with the archetypes. And I mean, spiritually, he did give this out in an interview he did towards the end of his life. Spiritually, he said, he did not believe in God. He knew in the existence of a power greater than himself. So yeah, he was asked point blank, do you believe in God? And he just smiled and said, no, I don't believe. I know. And that's just that level of gnosis that you can get to after you've devoted your life to the study of these concepts and realize that these concepts are more than just concepts. If you dedicate your life to a study of these realities, you can understand that, yeah, there's a lot more to the universe than what we can see and hear and touch and feel and taste. I mean, just a lot that goes beyond the five senses. Now, how do we explain in a rational, scientific way this understanding that the archetypes are living beings, and that something like tarot cards, like this is a Aquarian tarot deck that I like to use. How can a deck of tarot cards be considered living beings? Well, if you've read, this is another book I'm going to throw at you here, The Kybalion. That's a nice little book that you can buy pretty reasonably. I think I paid about, $4 or $5 for that. Found it online, and you can find it online. You can get the entire text in PDF format, I think, for nothing. And so it's a very deep book full of wisdom that you can get for very little money or no money at all if you know where to look. And in the Kybalion, the writer of the Kybalion states that the universe is created through thought energy emanating from something he calls the All. I tend to think of it as source, the source of all creation. But he says that everything in the material world is energy, and more specifically, composed of thought energy. And when he first wrote that in 1913, I believe, is when the Kybalion first came out, that was a little while before we split the atom and created the first atom bomb. But now since 1945 and the 1950s, and today we know all about atom bombs, nuclear energy, and everybody should be pretty well aware with the now proven theory that everything in material existence is actually energy that's held into vibration as who was it, Max Planck said, held into a certain vibratory pattern by a divine mind, and that was how Max Planck understood it, that we can see how the universe can be composed of energy, which of course we've demonstrated scientifically, and more specifically when you add consciousness into the mix. Like thought energy, I tend to think of that as consciousness, or energy that is self-aware. You can understand that if all things are composed of thought energy, emanating from the mind of nature or the mind of the all, mental energy that's being held into certain vibratory patterns to create the illusion of material existence, then we can understand that everything is made up of thought energy. And if that theory is true, I mean, we know that everything is made up of energy. That's been pretty much proven. What hasn't been proven is what kind of energy it is. Is it thought energy? Is it just random static energy? But if we accept the theory that everything is composed of thought energy, then everything is going to have a certain level of consciousness. In other words, like the Hermeticists of old have taught, like the Wiccans teach today, everything is alive. And I know for people that tend to look at the world from a materialistic viewpoint, that may be a challenge, but if everything is composed of thought energy, held into place by some sort of a divine mind, or the mind of the all, as the writer of the Kybalion states, then in a very real sense, everything is alive, even a rock. Now, a rock is not going to have the same level of consciousness as a human being. And a human being is probably not going to have the same level of consciousness as a ethereal being, like an angel or a divine being, whatever you want to call it. But everything is going to have a certain level of consciousness. And once you get comfortable with that understanding, once you start grokking it, so to speak, on a deeper and deeper level, then you can understand that you can have, and this is going to sound weird to the uninitiated, but I don't care at this point, you can actually have a pretty good conversation with just about anything. And I'm not talking about just walking around and talking to yourself or talking to the camera on YouTube, but yeah, you can actually communicate with just about anything, and I'm pretty much convinced that that's where things like psychic phenomena, moving objects with your mind, psychokinesis, and all that stuff, I think that plays a big part in that phenomenon. It's that certain folks, either on a conscious level or an unconscious level, have the ability to communicate with inanimate objects and can persuade those objects to do what they need them to do. And we look at that and we say, wow, that's pretty weird psychic phenomenon, but actually it's just people with a very deep understanding of the nature of the universe using the deeper laws of the universe to accomplish some pretty interesting stuff. So when we're talking about Carl Jung and his assertion that, the spirits are alive, the archetypes are alive, that these are living beings, and compare that to Aleister Crowly's assertion that the tarot, it's not just 78 cards, it's 78 living beings, we can understand that, I think, through the lens of the Kybalion and modern-day Wicca and other schools of mysticism, that all things have some level of consciousness. All things are alive, and we can have a relationship with all things as living beings, because we all get our being, our state of being, from the all. Something that I used to call God, but now I just think of it as the source of all, or source. but we all get our state of being from Source. And so we share in being. We don't have our beings, independently of one another. I mean, we do have free will. We do have, as individuals, a certain level of independence. But the ground of being is something that we all share. And when we learn the interconnectedness of all things, in that, what I'm going to call the ground of being, on that ground of being, then, yeah, we can reach out to a pack of tarot cards, have a conversation with the archetypes that they represent, have a conversation with the cards themselves, listen in, and this is going to sound weird too, but listen in as the cards converse with one another, and then use that to give guidance and advice to ourselves or to other people. And you can do that same thing with anything. A rock, a stone, a tree, stuff that normally people don't think of as being sentient, but they do have a certain level of consciousness. And it is possible to relate to these things on a much deeper level than most people are aware of. So, hope I didn't get too weird, too strange with you on that video, but that's where I'm coming from with tarot interpretation, and many other interpretations too, is just learning to understand that all things are alive. All things have a certain level of consciousness, and we can communicate with all things and develop a deeper relationship with all things, and learn to live in harmony with everything in the material universe. And that's where I'm coming from, and that's what gives me happiness in this life, lives past, and life to come. So, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, like, share, and subscribe. I'm going to put my cup of coffee down there, and we'll catch you in the next video. Until later, this is Ralph from Hermetic Temple Arts, signing off.